The hidden trap of mass psychosis and how to break free. Have you ever felt like everyone around you is under some kind of spell? Not in a sci-fi or fantasy sense, but in a real, tangible way, like people are no longer thinking for themselves, like something invisible has hijacked their minds. If you've felt that, sensed that, even for a moment, then you've glimpsed a truth so uncomfortable most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. And you're not crazy. You're not paranoid. You're awake. What you're sensing is real. And philosophers have warned us about it for centuries. This video is about that warning, about the trap that most of us are already inside, and about the dangerous, beautiful, terrifying freedom that comes when you finally break out. This is the hidden trap of mass psychosis and how to break free. In the first few minutes, I want us to go deep fast. So let's start with a hard question. What if most people aren't thinking their own thoughts? What if most people are not even aware that they've stopped thinking at all? That's the essence of mass psychosis, a condition not of the individual mind, but of the collective one. A kind of social hypnosis where truth is replaced by consensus, fear replaces curiosity, and obedience is mistaken for morality. And worst of all, it doesn't feel like madness when you're inside it. It feels like safety. It feels like belonging. It feels like being on the right side of history. That's what makes it so dangerous.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
To understand how this happens, we have to look beyond politics, beyond culture, beyond the headlines. We have to look into the structure of human consciousness itself. The psychologist Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a shared, inherited pool of instincts, symbols, and impulses. And when fear floods that unconscious, when a society becomes overwhelmed by threat, real or imagined, it starts to seek shelter in sameness, in control, in conformity. The individual, once a thinker, becomes a node in a network of unexamined belief. And the tragedy is, most people feel more awake when this happens. They feel more certain, more righteous, more secure. But what they're really experiencing is the illusion of clarity, not truth, just agreement. Let me give you an analogy. A massive school of fish moving in perfect unison. From above, it looks intelligent, coordinated, even beautiful. But inside that school, each fish is just reacting to the movements of the ones around it. There's no thinking, no reflection, just reflex. Now imagine what happens when one fish stops. When one fish starts asking, why are we moving this way? Where are we going? That fish is immediately out of sync. It feels the resistance. It's seen as a threat. And eventually, it's either forced back into the movement or cast out entirely. That's what happens to the individual in mass psychosis. The moment you stop going along with the collective current, you become a problem. Not because you're wrong, but because you're awake. And this is where it gets personal. Because we've all been part of the school at some point. We've all believed things just because everyone else did. We've all silenced ourselves to avoid discomfort. We've all looked away when something felt off, but didn't want to be that person. The trap doesn't start with censorship. It starts with self-censorship. It starts the moment we trade our inner clarity for social approval. And in that moment, we don't just betray ourselves, we become complicit in the very madness we fear. It's a quiet death, a slow erosion of self. And the worst part, it feels normal. So how do we escape it? How do we break free from something that's so invisible, so embedded in the fabric of our everyday lives? The answer isn't easy, but it's simple. We have to remember how to think, not react, not repeat, not regurgitate. Think. We have to reclaim the forgotten skill of holding two opposing ideas in our mind without collapsing into certainty. We have to get comfortable with ambiguity, with nuance, with not knowing. That's the true mark of sanity, not confidence, but curiosity, not answers, but questions. And here's one for you. When was the last time you changed your mind about something that truly mattered? If that question feels threatening, that's the conditioning. That's the trap. Mass psychosis isn't just about what we believe, it's about how we believe. It's about the rigidity of thought, the inability to entertain alternatives, the fear of being wrong. And that fear is what keeps the illusion alive. So if we want to escape, we have to start with the most radical act of all: self-honesty. We have to be willing to face our own programming, our own blind spots, our own complicity, not to shame ourselves, but to free ourselves. Because the truth is, mass psychosis can only survive when individuals refuse to take responsibility for their own minds. And that brings us to the most important insight of all. The opposite of mass psychosis is not mass enlightenment, it's individual sovereignty. You don't save the world by convincing everyone else to wake up. You save the world by waking up yourself and then living in alignment with that awakening, even if it means walking alone, even if it means being misunderstood, even if it means letting go of everything that used to make you feel safe. Because safety is not the goal. Truth is. And truth, by its very nature, is disruptive. It dismantles illusions. It challenges power. It threatens the comfort of the collective trance. But it also heals. It liberates. It reconnects us to something deeper than consensus reality. Look around. We live in a world that rewards performance, not presence. That praises agreement, not depth. That monetizes attention, not wisdom. And in that world, the most revolutionary thing you can do is think for yourself. It sounds simple, but it's not easy, because thinking for yourself means you'll be wrong sometimes. It means you'll wrestle with doubt. It means you won't always have a tribe to back you up. But it also means you'll be alive. Truly, painfully, beautifully alive. And that aliveness is the antidote to the deadness of mass conformity. It's the spark that lights the way out of the fog. So let me ask you this, and I want you to sit with it. Are you thinking your own thoughts right now? Or are you thinking the thoughts you were taught to think? That question might unsettle you. Good. That's how you know you're starting to wake up. That's how you know the spell is breaking. And once it breaks, even a little, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to see others not as enemies, but as fellow captives. Not as threats, but as reflections. And in that shift, compassion is born. Not the kind that comes from virtue signaling, but the quiet, grounded compassion of someone who has seen their own madness and chosen to heal. Why truth becomes dangerous in a world addicted to agreement. If the first step out of mass psychosis is self-honesty, then the second step is far more dangerous: truth. Not relative truth, not personal truth, but truth that cuts through illusion like a blade. Because once you begin to think for yourself, once you step outside the collective trance, you inevitably collide with truths that the crowd has agreed not to see. And here's the unsettling part. The moment you speak that truth, you don't just risk being ignored, you risk being attacked. Why? Because the crowd is not just addicted to agreement, it is held together by it. Agreement is the glue, the drug, the religion. And anyone who threatens it, even with honesty, especially with honesty, becomes a heretic. Mass psychosis doesn't just distort reality, it depends on distorting it. It's not built on facts, it's built on consensus. And consensus doesn't care about reality. It only cares about survival. The crowd, the hive mind, the mass, whatever you want to call it, it needs everyone moving in the same direction, feeling the same fears, repeating the same slogans. Because if even one person breaks that rhythm, it reminds everyone else that they could be thinking differently. It exposes the illusion of unanimity. And so the truth teller becomes the villain, not because they're wrong, but because they're disruptive. In a world addicted to agreement, truth is the ultimate threat. Let's look at history. Every major shift in human consciousness began with a person who saw the truth and was punished for it. Socrates was executed. Galileo was silenced. Giordano Bruno was burned. These weren't criminals. They were philosophers, thinkers, outsiders. And what made them dangerous wasn't their politics or their rebellion, it was their clarity. They saw something others couldn't or wouldn't see, and they refused to lie about it. That refusal is what made them dangerous, and it still does. Because the crowd doesn't fear violence nearly as much as it fears independence of thought. A bomb can destroy a building, but an idea, an unshakable idea in the mind of a free person, that can dissolve an entire empire. Now here's where it gets even more intense. The crowd isn't made up of bad people. It's made up of scared people, confused people, people who've been conditioned to believe that obedience is virtue and questioning is dangerous. People who don't even realize they're in a trance. And that's why the truth is not just rejected, it's hated. Because waking up hurts. It demands sacrifice. It forces you to grieve the lies you used to call reality. And most people would rather protect the lie than face that grief. Think about that. Would you rather live in a lie that feels safe or a truth that feels lonely? If you don't know, you're not ready to break free. But if that question haunts you, you're already on your way out. So what do? We stop trying to wake up the crowd. That's not our job. Our job is not to convince, not to convert, but to embody. To live the truth so fully, so deeply, so unapologetically, that our very existence becomes a crack in the matrix. We don't argue with the trance, we transcend it. We become the kind of person who sees clearly, speaks carefully, and lives honestly even when it's terrifying. Even when it costs us everything. Because that's what it means to be truly free. Freedom isn't comfort, it's clarity. It's the ability to say, I see what you see, but I do not believe it. I hear what you're saying, but I will not repeat it. I walk among you, but I do not belong to you. And here's the paradox. Once you do that, once you stop needing the crowd's approval, you stop fearing its rejection. You become untouchable, not because you're arrogant, but because you're rooted. Rooted in something deeper than consensus, deeper than identity, rooted in reality, in being, in truth. And from that place you begin to see the crowd not as enemies, but as prisoners, not as sheep, but as souls in hiding. And that's where compassion returns, not the cheap, performative kind, but the real kind. The kind that sees another person trapped in illusion and whispers, I see you. I was there too, and you can leave. But don't mistake compassion for compromise. Living in truth doesn't mean appeasing the trance. It means resisting it quietly, consistently, courageously, in your thoughts, in your actions, in the way you speak and listen and love. Because every moment you choose truth over comfort, clarity over conformity, you're breaking the spell not just for yourself, but for others watching in silence, wondering if they're the only ones who feel like something is wrong. You're not just escaping mass psychosis. You're becoming the lighthouse for those still lost in it. So ask yourself now, and ask honestly, what truth have I been avoiding because I'm afraid of what it will cost me? That's the edge. That's the doorway. That's where your real life begins. The alchemy of awakening, turning isolation into inner power. Once you've seen through the illusion, once you've taken that first irreversible step out of mass psychosis, something unexpected happens. The noise quiets, the colors change, the world begins to look unfamiliar, not because it has changed, but because you have. And with that shift comes a heavy cost, isolation. Not the kind that's romanticized in movies or turned into aesthetic poetry, but the kind that burns, the kind that makes you question whether waking up was worth it. Because when you no longer speak the language of the trance, you lose the conversation. You become the outsider, the anomaly, the one who doesn't laugh at the same jokes, doesn't join the rituals, doesn't flinch at the same fears. And that distance can feel like death. But here's the deeper truth, that isolation is not punishment. It's initiation. It is the sacred space where your false self dies and your real self is forged. This is what the mystics, sages, and philosophers endured not as a side effect of awakening, but as a requirement. Because to truly break free from the collective hypnosis, you must shed every part of yourself that was built for approval. Every habit of thought, Emotion, posture, speech, everything shaped by the need to belong must be examined, questioned, and stripped away. And when that process begins, when the masks fall and the crowd disappears, you're left with something terrifying and sacred. Now you face the void. And here's where the true alchemy begins. That void is not empty, it's full. Full of raw material, full of potential, full of you, the parts that were buried beneath conformity, the truths you silenced to fit in, the visions you abandoned to be accepted. This is the moment where you stop looking outward and begin turning inward, not to escape, but to build. To build an inner world so complete, so true, so sovereign, that you no longer need the outer world to reflect it. This is what philosophers like Nietzsche meant when they spoke of the Übermensch, not a superior human in the arrogant sense, but a self-created one, a being who has reclaimed authorship of their own life. But this path is not easy. You will feel grief. You'll mourn the loss of a self that never truly existed. You'll feel rage at the systems that conditioned you, and sorrow for the years you spent asleep. You'll feel the ache of seeing others still caught in the dream, especially those you love. But if you stay with it, if you don't numb yourself, don't run back to the crowd, don't try to make your awakening palatable, you'll begin to feel something else. Power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The power to say no when everyone else says yes. The power to wait when everyone else rushes. The power to speak your truth calmly without needing to convince. And most importantly, the power to be alone, not as a victim, but as a sovereign being. That is the alchemy. Turning isolation into inner power requires radical self-responsibility. It means you stop blaming the world for your pain and start asking, what am I here to learn from this? It means you stop looking for saviors and start becoming one, for yourself, and eventually for others. Because once you've built that inner world, once you've lived in the silence long enough to hear your true voice, something extraordinary happens. You begin to radiate. Not as a performance, not for attention, but as a natural consequence of alignment. People will feel it. They won't know why, but they'll sense something different about you. Your presence will challenge them not through force, but through clarity. And some will hate you for it. But others will be drawn to it, like moths to a flame, because deep down they're longing to wake up too. And that's when you realize something beautiful. You were never truly alone. You were just ahead of the curve, ahead of the crowd, ahead of the time. And now your very existence becomes a signal to others that freedom is possible, that truth is survivable, that awakening is worth the pain. You become a living invitation not to follow you, but to follow themselves. And that perhaps is the highest form of service a human can offer, not to lead the masses, but to liberate the individual one soul at a time. So I leave you with this. What if your isolation is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your real one? What if the loneliness you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but that something finally is right? The trance is breaking, the spell is lifting, the system is shaking, and you are waking up.